Prodeus is a game I was very excited for. The visual style looked awesome, and the combat looked impactful, visceral, and incredibly satisfying. When I got the game towards the end of its early access and started playing it, I was having a ton of fun. The combat feel was some of the best I've experienced, the guns sound great, the enemies totally melt, the particle effects are plentiful, and it really made you feel like you're using something powerful. I also thought the aesthetic and vibe of the game looked pretty cool. The art is great, and the lighting and reflections work really well with that art style, and the music is sick. I'm a giant metalhead, so it makes me feel things in my pancreas. But the fun I was having faded really fast. After playing for a few hours, I realized I was really starting to have to push myself to keep playing. And it kinda sucks. This game is pretty well received, and a lot of people seem to love it. However, I'll have you know that when it comes to the video game court of public opinion, I'm a chaotic deviant and a heretic, it seems. Like the button-pressing equivalent of someone who eats well-done steak. And I would in fact eat well-done steak, purely to piss off Americans and chefs. As you can probably tell by the title, Prodeus is a bit of a mixed bag for me. More specifically, half of it is top tier and the other half is pretty underwhelming. Unfortunately, the bit that's underwhelming is something that I find to be a bit more important. It starts off great, hitting you with the art style, music, and fantastic game feel, but it's almost like it plays nearly all of its cards right off the bat. Games hook you best by consistently feeding you new ideas, mechanics, and different feeling content, so you come to expect new experiences as you keep playing. Sure, Prodeus gives you new weapons as you play, and the levels are definitely different from each other, but that alone isn't enough to keep me wanting to play more. A lot of levels in the game do feel pretty similar, at least in the beginning. The problem is that about 2/3 of the game feels like it takes place in the same chain of facilities. A good example of level variety is Dusk, another retro shooter that you should absolutely check out. Each level is a different location, even though the first episode is all technically in the same town. You have a farm, a factory, a church in its catacombs, a sawmill, a mine, and so on. While Proteus definitely has different levels themed around different kinds of sub-facilities, the levels in Dusk feel more distinct from each other. And that's just the first episode. The second episode switches to something more akin to Half-Life to keep things fresh, and the last episode leans heavier into dark fantasy. There are a lot of games that keep things in one location, but the good examples try to diversify as much as they can and give each location their own identity and feel. Prodeus has levels that feel more unique in the first zone, but if 2/3 of the game is that same base aesthetic, then it gets boring fast. It honestly feels a bit like they released the early access, realized it was too repetitive, and then added areas with a different aesthetic. I don't know if that's the case, but it's not a good impression to give. A better way to organize levels would have been to have the player travel to the different zones throughout the game. Doom 2016 did exactly this, and even though the Mars facility aesthetic got pretty stale, throwing in hell levels midway through helped a lot. Thematically, demon aliens in industrial space complexes is just not unique at this point. And while the game does look good, the repetition in visual design harms the overall experience. I mentioned earlier that the game does change visually later on, and it does. After 17 levels. That's if you don't include the optional trials, and I definitely wouldn't count shops. For me, that was around 6 hours. 6 hours of the same visual theme in a game where the majority of what you do is running around, killing enemies you essentially fought 30 years ago. I'll talk about the enemy design more later. At that point, the game was desperately in need of a visual change. To put things into perspective, Dusk is 7.5 hours long. Prodeus is about the same. Keep in mind, these are average playtimes and your pace will likely differ. While Prodeus is still using the same asteroid factory theme nearly 6 hours in, Dusk was consistently changing the vibe of almost every level. And I don't think we even need to talk about Ultrakill. I know New Blood games tend to be extremely high quality, but Prodeus was also at overwhelmingly positive Steam reviews at one point. Combine that with the outstanding visual presentation and music, I think it's quite fair to compare them. Sometimes it feels like the biggest change you see in Prodeus is different colored floor hazards. Everything looks so goddamn similar until you have about 15 to 20% of the game left. Now, I'm going to be spoiling the remaining levels a bit. I really don't think it's that big of a deal, but if you really don't want to have them spoiled at this point, then you can skip ahead to this timestamp. There are 21 total levels in the asteroid factory, 1 in a temple, 3 in chaos, 1 in a space station, and then 2 in a frozen tundra. Then 2 in what's essentially hell. So that's 9 levels that aren't the factory setting. I mean, that doesn't sound too bad, right? Yeah, let me change your mind on that. The first 2 levels in Chaos look a whole lot like the temple to me. The first one, you run around aimlessly, shooting fucking triangles and spongy enemies, and everything is goddamn blue. The second one is basically 3 rooms where you fight a shit ton of enemies. It took me 6 minutes. The third Chaos level does look more different, but it's essentially a bunch of enemy gauntlets in a row with no depth in level design. Just a straight path. And by straight, I mean it turns, and you know what I fucking mean. The space station is essentially just hordes of enemies thrown at you. It has very little intricate level design. It does look cool, but like the first 3 or 4 minutes of the map, you're not even on the space station. You're going to a rocket to take you there, so you get even less time on the cool space station. The frozen area is literally the asteroid factory, but frozen over. And I'm not just saying literally for shits and giggles, I mean it's literally the same place. And the second hell level is actually just 1 room, and it's not even a big room. I know it's a boss fight, but you could have done a little more, I think. Like, you already had a cool set of models from the previous hell level. You could have just reused them a bit and given a couple more rooms. Look, even the map for the area looks like a joke. You went to the trouble of making an entire dimension for these totally not demons, and you barely used it. So when the game does give you new areas, they're mechanically uninspired and aren't given enough levels to breathe. It really feels like those last 9 levels were rushed. I don't know the situation the devs are in. Maybe they had some stuff come up and couldn't finish the game the way they wanted to. I'm just here to talk about the end product. I've been criticizing this game a lot, but I do want to be fair and give praise where it's due. The sniper level was pretty good. It's not a pain in the ass like a lot of other gimmick levels like this. You don't have to sit and wait for like 9 goddamn seconds until the sniper looks somewhere else because, ooh, stealth. Nah, the snipers are always aiming in your direction, but you just run your tits off until you get to the next bit of cover. After you get to the snipers, you have this one segment on a train that feels pretty cool, and then a story-related segment where they have you fight an enemy they teased before. But then the level keeps going. They make you go back through a bunch of the level, but just without the snipers. Sure, it feels a bit different since you're also going backwards, but I just think it was kind of unnecessary. But that's pretty much my only criticism of the level. I also think Corruption's a pretty cool level with the bit where you guide the truck along. It's not too different from going around pressing buttons, but sometimes the illusion of a gimmick works fine. I think Hazard's another great level with the gimmick of changing the level of the green goop to get higher and higher. Yeah, maybe changing water level is a gimmick as old as dirt, but I still think it's fun, so the addition is welcome. Anyway, I think I've talked enough about levels for now. Enemy design is definitely one of the reasons why the game lost me. I mentioned before that you essentially fight the same enemies you fought 30 years ago. And what I mean by that is the fact that nearly all of them function just like the ones in Doom. A lot of the designs are cool, but that only goes so far. Ultrakill does have a good chunk of enemies that function like classic Doom enemies, but it doesn't really bother me since you can interact with them in different ways. In Prodeus, it's all running around and shooting. Sometimes jumping, yes. You have the zombies from Doom, you have the shotgun guy from Doom, you have the minigun guys from Doom, the lunger is just a pinky, the bloater is just a cacodemon, skullfish are lost souls, fiends are imps, and void reapers are pain elementals. Proteus class enemies are basically just spongy versions of the regular enemies, so aside from the cool blue goo, they're honestly just less enjoyable to fight than the regular enemies. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry, the Proteus variant of the pinky ripoff shoots balls at you. Just like half the enemies in the game. There aren't enough enemies that feel unique to Proteus, and it's just another thing that makes the gameplay feel stale far too soon. Dusk only has 1 more enemy than Proteus, minus bosses, but since it spaces their introductions out, not only do they feel more special, no, I am not counting the Kool-Aid variants as new enemies, it also keeps your expectations of new content more consistent. The game also doesn't really have actual boss fights. There are only segments where you fight a tougher enemy, but half the time they're surrounded by a bunch of other regular enemies. You don't get to deal with one big enemy that demands your attention. Constantly fighting hordes does get stale, so having boss fights where you go one-on-one with a unique enemy can help give players a change of pace without it clashing with the core gameplay, especially if the boss has big sweeping attacks that you have to dodge. Even if you're still running around shooting and dodging attacks, like I said before, sometimes the illusion of change is good enough. These styles of games are all about feeling like a badass. Mowing through hordes of enemies is total power fantasy, but so is fighting some big fucking hentai creature with a jillion eyeballs. Zelda knows what's up. Not this one though, this is a total boner killer. Space out your enemy introductions, try your best to create your own mechanically unique enemies, Have your unique designs be a part of gameplay frequently, and if you don't want to throw in gimmick mechanics like turret sections or fucking skateboarding, rely on boss fights to break up the pace. Though I will argue that the few platforming segments in Prodeus are really fun, and I'd like to see more of that. I think the last major point of contention I want to talk about is the shop. The shop wasn't in early access when I played, so I only got to check it out when I played the release version. Honestly, I do like the idea of having a shop. I really think a lot of these new retro shooters are a bit overly simplistic and too keen on just trying to replicate the 90s instead of trying to incorporate the new features that games grew to have over the years. A shop can be a nice simple addition that adds some progression to your game. I do think that simplicity is part of the charm of a lot of retro shooters, so I think just adding some stuff like ammo capacity upgrades, health upgrades, or in the case of Ultra Kill, it being the way to unlock variants of weapons. Unfortunately, I believe the shop in Prodeus is half-baked and feels shoehorned in. I believe that if you're going to add something like this, you should do it decently well, or a lot of people are either going to pretend it doesn't exist or ask why did you even bother. Along with being half-baked, it feels unnecessarily restrictive. The shop has a tier system that the game does not explain. Basically, you have to buy all the items of a tier to unlock the next tier, so you can't pick the items you want to buy to add replay value or have some strategy. I don't think the idea of using ores you find in levels to buy stuff is... Not everyone likes finding secrets or is good at finding secrets. A lot of people just want to kill a bunch of stuff. So I think a better system would be to earn upgrade points by playing the game and killing enemies, just like in Ultra Kill and Bulletstorm. The game already feels like the first act of reproduction, and by that I mean sex, so giving us stupid monkeys rewards in a big number go bigger for melting shit is a surefire way to give players a dopamine rush. I mean, fuck dude, look at how popular Cookie Clicker is. We're like mosquitoes. While I do agree that there's something to be said about being rewarded for your efforts, I still prefer just earning points and spending them. I think having a separate secret currency that allows you to get unique items and upgrades would be a good idea. Sort of like Ratchet and Clank. A system I think I would enjoy would be some kind of hybrid of Ratchet and Clank and Bulletstorm. Your main currency from killing enemies would be used to buy more simple stuff like magazine capacities, ammo capacities, and maybe a different option for alternate fire. Your secret currency would be used for things that change the way your weapon functions at its core, health upgrades, and special weapons that you can't find from playing the game normally. But you gotta make sure you give the player cool and unique feeling weapons without having to interact with the secret currency system. Bulletstorm offers bonus points for killing enemies in different ways. Prodeus already has locational damage. You can give bonuses for headshots, liquefations, multi-kills, and whatever else you can come up with. Actually, it would be pretty sick if the game had a kick mechanic where you could just send enemies off ledges and into traps. You're already ripping off Doom, so why not rip off another banger of a game? I want to mention one last thing about the shop though. Double jump and dash being shoehorned in is an odd decision. I don't know why they didn't add them as items you find and then build platforming segments around having them. They essentially function like an additional speedrun item like the running shoes in Crash Bandicoot. I definitely don't hate having them. In fact, I think the game feels even better to play with them. But it would be way more fun to have sections of the game built to actually use these features. Again, it just gives the impression that the game was rushed. Anyway, those are my main big problems with the game and why I think it struggled to hold my attention despite having a fantastic foundation and some genuinely really good moments. There are other things I want to talk about though. First up is the guns. I just want to talk about the main guns that you spend a lot of time with. The pistol is one of the best feeling pistols I've used in any game. It doesn't feel pathetic like in most games, and it's got a pretty great sound effect too. Honestly, one of the only other games I've played with pistols I really liked was the Battlefield series. I also really like Blacklight Retribution's revolver, and my modded Fallout 4 feels pretty good too. They're not totally useless. You're more than capable of taking down enemies with it. As you see, you can even take out lungers without it taking 17 goddamn years. And that's the way it should be. All your weapons in a game like this should be useful. I'm not that big on the burst fire though. Sure, it's technically shooting faster, but I'd honestly rather just run up and spam it. Next up is the shotgun. I think this is one of the best feeling shotguns out there too. Partly because of what it does to enemies. Applying reductive math equations to biomass with buckshot will never not be fun in video games. To be honest, the secondary fire on the shotgun kinda sucks. It just does not do enough damage to justify how long it takes to charge. Sure, it goes farther and it's alright for headshotting trash mobs, but I can also just run up and shoot them in the face. It doesn't even pierce, so it's just not satisfying to use and it's not good at dealing with groups. The shredders are pretty handy. I do like them quite a bit. I think the devs are pretty smart with how they work. You can shoot both at the same time for good up close damage, or you can shoot only one so it's pretty solid at range. The reload is a little slow though. The plasma rifle generally feels pretty good, but the gigantic blue orbs come right out of the middle of the screen and obstruct the absolute shit out of your vision. Using it in the blue ass area actually gave me glaucoma. I found the secondary fire to be extremely circumstantial, so I never got much use out of it. The rocket launcher was my bread and butter for clearing groups and high single target damage, but I always thought remote detonation was the lamest possible secondary fire you could add to a rocket launcher. Why do that when cluster bombs exist? The minigun is insanely satisfying to use. It doesn't do a ton of damage, so it still takes a little time to mow through groups of weak monsters, but if it was any more powerful it would be overpowered. The secondary being barrel rotation is serviceable as a secondary, but I can't help but feel I was spoiled by how awesome Doom's minigun was. The arc rail is pretty alright at dealing with groups of weak enemies with its normal fire, but the secondary is fantastic for vaporizing weak enemies in a row and for sniping. It does sound a little weak though, sort of like a bolt of lightning inside a giant pillow. The super shotty is based and the secondary just deletes everything in the goddamn game. Even some of the toughest enemies die from 2 secondaries. The regular fire is good for normal enemies too, since it's just the same as the regular shotgun. Fists are almost entirely useless, but they're fun, so I don't give a shit. Overall, I'm generally satisfied with the weapon selection. I didn't show all of them, I just wanted to give a general idea of what you're in for. A lot of the secondaries are kinda flaccid, but it's not like it ruins the gameplay for me. Alright, I'm gonna shoot off some other points since I was unable to fit them in the script in a way I'm satisfied with, or they were added later. Sometimes buttons to progress can be a little hard to find. Sometimes I'll end up running around a room looking for a button since control panels don't stand out a whole lot. Just another gray box amongst gray boxes. The checkpoint system is extremely forgiving. When you die and respawn, enemies don't respawn, so you can just face tank nearly 100% of the game by running in, killing a few enemies, dying, and running back in. I also think the devs knew this was an issue and started throwing dick tons of enemies at you at the end. Only the last level gave me an actual challenge since it restricts respawns, and it was a lot of fun. I've seen a lot of people complain about the fact that the game has reloading, and they say that it ruins the game's flow and pacing, and I'm gonna be honest, I think y'all are just being overly fucking dramatic. It's like slightly slower at worst. The reloading takes like half a second. It's not better or worse in my opinion, just different. People act like retro shooters just aren't allowed to have reloading, and to me, they never give any good reasons why. You can say you dislike it, you can say you prefer not having to reload. Putting it up there as one of the main issues the game has is ridiculous. People will list reloading as a major complaint alongside boring level design, repetitive gameplay, and lackluster final hours. That's like going to the police saying, "Officer, something horrible happened. He cut off my leg, disabled my kidneys, stole my lollipop, and ate my wife." It makes you sound like a petulant old fart who wants everything to be like how it was in the games that came out 30 years ago. It's not better because it's old, it's not better because Doom and Quake did it. Like I said, you can dislike it, that's fine, but please be reasonable. Personally, I'm pretty indifferent to the reloading. I think not having reloading fit Doom Eternal. I think reloading in Prodeus feels fine, partly because it's not an established franchise, and partly because it feels a little more grounded than Doom. It's more sci-fi, less fantasy. Honestly, I think the fact that you have so many weapons and only 5 types of ammo is more of a nuisance. I feel like the game is just trying to be Doom without thinking whether or not it's actually something fun to implement. Doom is great, but it's aged. Retro shooters are a goldmine of potential to take old ideas that aren't being produced anymore and make them work with today's gaming climate, while also throwing in new ideas to make something that can help you feel the nostalgia and have a fresh experience that beats out a lot of bigger budget games in the fun department. Prodeus makes attempts to modernize in a lot of ways, but seems stuck in the past in a lot of others. I firmly believe the developers are skilled and know how to make a damn good game, but I want to see more creativity. I think you should buy Prodeus, give them the money and support they need to continue to make high quality products. I was hard on this game at times, but that's because I believe there's potential here. If this is the first game the studio has made, I am very excited for the future. The foundations are in place for a top tier sequel that can truly stand next to the likes of Dusk and Ultrakill. I just hope they see the criticism and have the ambition and budget to make that happen. Let's help them out. Thanks for watching.